NFTs, cryptocurrency, that has now found its way into board gaming. And you're an organization that has a lot of litcoin, not to be confused with Bitcoin, and then you want to spend it. And spending it on these things is super easy. So play as even a couple of simps in this really accessible, fast, bluffing card game for 2 to 5. Let's see who has the best real estate. To win Auction Web, you're trying to buy a bunch of properties, and whoever has the most points added up from all the properties wins the game. In order to get these cards, you'll be bidding your litcoin cards. Yes, that's with an L, and then these are going from your hand next to each property. Each property can only have one bid at a time, but here's the catch. The bids are all face down. So if you want to replace a bid, you play a card, secretly compare its value to the one already there, and whichever card is higher stays as the active bid. At the end of the round, whoever has a card on each property just gets that property. Then you deal out new properties and draw new bidding cards for the next round. After 3 of these rounds, whoever has the most points from these properties is the best user of litcoin, and you win the game. Let's jump right into the pros. This game is pretty easy to follow visually for just being a prototype copy. All the factions and money colors are easy to see, and the cards themselves feel fairly durable. Listen to that. And then for these property cards, well, the art and flavor really throw you into this theme of a futuristic light, huh? We would categorize this style as slightly satire with an Asian twist, with a mochi waterfall, a 720 dispensary, UFOs, wait, what? And even a wasabi ice cream parlor that sounds terrible to own and buy from. Like, ugh, wasabi ice cream? But hey, it gives you 2 points, right? Yeah, okay, so these properties are all over the place in their ideas, and because of that, they're pretty unique and fun to look at. So when you're playing the game, it has this really simple turn structure that's so easy to grasp. You can do one of 2 things on your turn. You either play a card from your hand, or you pass. That's it, with everything centered around your current hand of cards. The cool thing is that in this world where you can somehow bid on UFOs, some of the currency will counter each other. Yeah, so some of the currency is not quite currency. How about extorting your friends with a 0, which is the lowest number, that can only beat a 6, which is the cash money strong card in the game? Or how about paying for some solid encryption with a 1 that blocks against only 3s and 4s? And then, I suppose your thugs are able to give you some of that black market cash when you win a property with a 0, because then you get an extra point. So you should likely save extortion for the end of a round to snipe people. So yeah, there is this rock, paper, scissors thing going on with the money, which is slightly unthematic and we'll get back to, but fun to play around with nonetheless. Another place for nuance is this lowball ability. To trigger such lowballs, they go off when you try to play a card from your hand and you compare it and you lost. Not to worry, bam, you get to use the lowball thing. In the case of a 2, you get to swap 2 face down bids. This really reduces the amount of dead cards you'll have in your hand, but also makes the game less punishing overall. If you bid this and you're like, let me do, I forgot that was a 6. Well, not to worry, because even if I do lose my 5, which is the second strongest card, I get to use that lowball ability, take a look at something in their hand. Actually, most of the lowball effects let you look at something hidden, which gets us into how you can do some mind game bluffing in this game. Since every single card is placed face down, well, once you play a card of your own, the bluffing game can be on. Sometimes you want to bluff low to make people waste their stronger cards. But you know what? What if you bluff high and make people think you have a 6 that can only be beaten by a 0? And then when they play their 0, they look at your 5 and groan. The game keeps shooting at you partial information to play around with, because everyone's cards that lose bids get discarded face up. So you can go ahead and connect the dots on what the new card is that beat that discarded card. Again, there is some haziness here, like the card that is a 1 not being beatable by a 3 or 4. So if a 3 loses a bid, is it because it lost to a 4, a 5, or a 6? Or is it because it lost to a 1, which has that ability? So all of these face down cards may look like the game is a bit memorization heavy. Like remember how you can swap 2 face down cards? Do you remember what those 2 face down cards were? I sometimes don't. And yes, a bit of memorization will help you win here, but not that much is actually required. You can even look at your own face down bids if you forget. Cards typically aren't getting swapped too often, and if you do forget someone else's bid, don't worry too much. You can always bid somewhere else. And if that fails, well, you can revert back to your lowball abilities to try to get some information. Now remember, you can always pass instead of playing a card. And let's talk about why this is fun. So yeah, once you pass, you're out of the round forever. But the cool thing is that you're sacrificing tempo now for a stronger next round because you're gonna draw 5 cards to add on to what you already have in your hand. This is one of the biggest decisions you'll make in the game, where you can tank the current round to have a strong next round. Look at all this bidding power. We also have to praise how there's a good catch here in making you always have a hand cap of 7. So you can't really cheese and say you're pulling out early in the first rounds if you don't like the properties. Oh, and then yeah, these properties are rather unique too. The Asian satire properties got abilities sometimes to make bidding more tricky. Like how about the pachinko machine, where if you get it, you can look at a face down card once in each of the other rounds. Or the litcoin ATM, how do you even have an ATM for cryptocurrency? Okay, maybe someone can enlighten me, but this card lets you swap 2 bids at a future time. Then of course, you got the point bonus cards, where there's benefits to grabbing multiple colors of properties. Or of course, there's that UFO again to swap with your opponent's properties. The great part about the properties in general is that they slightly scale with rounds, so there's always comeback potential if you're a little behind early. To be fair, there's only 2 properties that actually give you abilities in this game, so you'll never see some crazy decked out board state where everyone is real estate moguls just tapping their property to complicate the game. And that's great, where the streamlined nature just keeps the game rolling. And when that late game does roll around, it's super easy to see what your opponents need, so you can counterbid them. Like, if they need a certain color of property, like for that card, well, you just bid it away from them. These 30 property cards also give the game good replayability, since you'll only see a handful every game. And how they're mixed and matched really affect the player's abilities and points. There's also an included variant to draft them, so then you can get rid of properties that don't match your strats. As we wrap up the pros, I want to drop how there's some nice room for light politics in this game. Points are all public and the current round's properties are all fair game as long as you have cards in your hand. So there's some convincing that starts going on who should bid where to block such and such. This is especially the case in that final and third round, where these last properties are flipped over and the game slows down a bit as you sit and discuss on who should bid where, and then you want to make sure your opponents are bidding against each other. Now for the cons of Auction Web, and this is hard with these Kickstarter games where updates keep rolling out, so some of these may need to be taken with a grain of salt. First, the rulebook explains its existing text pretty well, but is missing some stuff. Like for example, we were confused on when you could trigger your property abilities. So we got to talk to the designer, and fortunately, he told us that you can do them right before you bid on turns. Like, good thing we could talk to him because there's the same open-ended confusion for this wild property, where it was again clarified that it can change into as many properties as needed to obtain the most points. The rulebook is close to good and definitely has the right idea with its property cards guide and commonly overlooked rules, so this will probably not be a con with changes. Now for the gameplay cons. The first one is that the later you go on a round, the better it generally is. This comes from the fact that once you have a bid down on the board, there's no way to reinforce it, so there's not really any benefit to going first. But then if you go last, well, not having anyone after you is really nice to secure properties. Let's say you go last. If you save a strong card, like a 6, you can just, bam, pretty much guarantee a property. If you're earlier that round, well, you just have to watch a later player take your hard bid properties. There is a little bit done to address this after the first round. In the second and third round, you get dealt initiative trackers for turn order, like D&D. The guy with the most cards goes first, all the way down to the person with the least cards. So if you passed in the previous round, you will only get slightly more turns in the next. And then the amount of points you have breaks ties if you have the same hand size. This unfortunately still doesn't solve the problem of someone having just a teensy little bit more points, let's say like 1 less, but then having a property with an ability, like the very useful pachinko machine that looks at face down bids. So then you get to see some secret information and get the priority of getting to go last in the next round. Then this last player can grab an extra property or 2 and shoot it by a nice chunk of points for an easy lead. Like, look at that 0 giving an extra point because no one was able to react to it. Of course, this problem bubbles up the most when no one decides to pass and everyone has equal hands, which actually isn't that uncommon if you're unfamiliar with the game. And with the no passing, next rounds can feel kind of gross as the last place guy can just be last and get properties and shoot up a lot of points. A quick band-aid would be to have certain properties give an inherent +1 or +2 strength to bids there, to help early birds hang on to it a little bit easier. A bigger idea we had was to allow players to reinforce their bids by playing a card where you already have one. And let's say you play the second card face up to make it easier for other people to counterplay. So then now first players are shoring up that first turn weakness with this reinforcement. Granted, this is a big fix, because now you're changing the card dropping to bidding 2 cards at a time to beat this reinforced board. You would combine these 2 cards from your hand's strength and then just use one of the low ball abilities if you lose to keep things reasonable. Then we got some problems with this card, the 0. See, this guy being really obvious when played just completely breaks the bluffing element for the property it's on. If you see a 6 discarded from the board, well then, duh, a 0 beat it. What beats a 0? Oh, literally any card from 1 to 5. So I wonder what the next guy is going to do because he doesn't want that 0 to stay on the board because it gives an extra VP if the guy wins a property through it. This cycle can feel like deja vu once you experience it multiple times a game, or your group will pick up on it, and then 0s just aren't used until the very end of rounds. Compare this to the 6 card, which, when successful, could have beaten any card from 1 to 5 in the game. What we thought of to make this system work is to replace a 0 with a double 0 in each player's deck. And this 0/0 would still kill 6s, and then when any other player tries to play a 1 or 2 card on it, it becomes a bomb, and both cards clear. That would add actual mind games on whether people played a 0 or a 0/0. And then look at that. Cool explosions means that sometimes a round will end and no one gets a property, which is something new. Now for player count, this game falls apart with 2. It's where randomness rears its ugly head, and if you draw some bad hands, well, you can't count on the other players to help bid over the guy who's winning. This game's mechanics just don't feel well suited to a back and forth mechanic. Like, you could experiment with preset hands to reduce RNG, but that makes the gameplay feel really stale because you remove a lot of the bluffing and mind game elements. Okay, nitpick time. The first one is the components, where the prototype elements are kind of showing with this plastic bag, which these components, other than the money, not that useful. Anyways, this plastic bag feels like one of those candy bags. I'm sure changes are coming though, this will be ironed out. Now there is some slightly confusing stuff visually. For the VP point symbols, they are literally an L, which can get confusing because actually, they're not the litcoins. Your cards in hand are the L litcoins. On these litcoin cards, the lowball ability would have been so much easier to see if it was divided from the rest of the text. And it kind of just blends in with the entire card right now, but not a big deal because you're mostly reading them in your hand, and they're straightforward. Another thing here is the player aids, which are really wordy for how small they are. And they're double-sided. Remember, that's a no-no for player aids. Kind of like with the lowball visual clutter, we had no problem just ignoring these because the game is simple. Actually, speaking on wordiness, a lot of the properties could get cleaned up. How about the high-speed tricycle, where it says, during the cleanup phase, draw 1 extra litcoin card just a turn after you acquire this property card. Oh god, this could literally just be, when you get this card, draw a litcoin card. For the next nitpick, we're gonna whip out the calculations and get a little mathy on you guys. So according to my calculations, okay, more like my friend's calculations, this is a number that's a little scary, 3%. Now there's a 3% chance that with a hand of 5 cards, you won't be able to beat any of the encrypted ones on the board. Remember, 3s and 4s don't beat 1s. So if you get this hand on the last turn and someone plays a 1 on the property you really need, you can't do jack. This is really not a big deal for how lighthearted this game is, and you can always just bluff a good hand and hope other opponents outbid that 1 you can't beat. Or you can always just pass to carry those cards over to the next round. To reduce this chance of that 3% happening though, the game could use a one-time mulligan in that last round. You'll still have to draw your final cards in the deck to ensure you play with every card, and then from your discard pile, you shuffle that deck again and draw. Next, we gotta talk about time length. See, the game is listed at 15 to 25 minutes. And yeah, sure, the game's rounds will never drag because you will, quite simply, run out of cards to play. But due to the guessing of other people's hands and thinking about when exactly to pass, this game can hit over 30 minutes if your group plays a little more serious, even in groups of 3. Again, this is player reliant, just don't be surprised if you have a 5-player game take 45 minutes or so, especially with the increased jumble of convincing others not to bid on your properties. And then we're getting to the last nitpick, that theme. Yeah, for a game called Auction Web, it doesn't really feel like bidding because you're all bidding face down and then you're bidding in turn order after playing face down. This is not like a blind bid where you'd all bid at the same time. Rather, the rock, paper, scissors, litcoin abilities have you playing all sorts of numbers. This is not to say that stronger bids aren't better, 6 is just straight solid. But the litcoins are just loaded with so many abilities to make them feel less like money. Like, I'm just gonna show up at an auction, extort people with a 0 value coin. That is some cheeky stuff. In practice, Auction Web feels like a king of the hill for multiple properties, where you try to defend your company's properties, and then every so often, you have a 6. You can blast your opponents off your lawn. Oh wait, hold on, did I say companies? That sounds like what the game calls organizations. But these organization names just feel kind of weird. The Simpnist, Comrade Teddy, High Monk, like really? There's no backstories or lore either to get answers to why they're called these names, so they just end up feeling cheesy. At the end of it all, these theme disconnects don't take away from the light gameplay, and then you can just pretend that something like the Simpnist is just your online avatar. So now we get to scoring, and since this is a prototype, we can only go off of what we have here. Future art will look like that. Pretty cool. Anyways, our tentative score for Auction Web is going to be a 7 out of 10. It's tentatively good. The thing you have to keep in mind for Auction Web is that even though it does have auction in its name, it's not really that much of an auction game, besides the fact that you can intentionally lowball people. But then again, this lowball thing is where these litcoin currency cards stop feeling like money. But hey, this is all okay because these theme nitpicks don't really interfere with the smooth gameplay. Actually, let's talk about one of the fun elements of the non-auction-like Auction Web, which is bluffing. See, as opposed to pure bluffing games, Auction Web has bluffing only if you really want there to be. You are never actually called upon to bluff and announce what cards you put down. Rather, you never have to say anything at all. Then other people can later check it, and if they have something that ranks higher, they win, whether it's by accident or not. Or if they lose, well, it's not a big deal because they got those lowball abilities. So really, you could theoretically win this game without doing any sort of mind reading or bluffing. This very light bluffing nature will actually make Auction Web appeal to those who just don't like that stress from games. Like say, Coup, where you have to look at people in the eye and tell them what your card is. Auction Web is a lot more lax. In Auction Web, if you play more chill and forget a memorized card, the number system lets you mostly boil down hidden info to one of two things. Either it's higher or lower than your card. So a somewhat 50-50 coin flip for non-gamers to play with. And while everyone will have to pay attention to the discards, there's no perfect information because you can't look through the discard piles themselves. So yet again, making it more chill for those non-gamers. For us more try-hard board gamers, there are certainly some elements to play around with. You can try to mind game like crazy, or deduce other people's hands because everyone will draw through all their cards and will be discarding stuff. You can just totally spaz out and get a pretty clean idea of board states by the time the third round rolls around. But if you're so keen on calculating, still be careful because there's politics in this game. A lot of the final round results feel contingent on playing the politics at least somewhat decently. See, since properties only dangle by the strength of one card, whenever you see a card, you could just tell your co-conspirators what it is. On your turn, say you play 2. I lost. Okay, my 2 lost, Fred. So this one's actually a 4. So go ahead and play your 5 over it for the most efficiency. There's no restrictions on what you can say, which felt appropriate because they want to keep the game simple, and also there's nothing from stopping you from lying about what you see, right? But still, just keep in mind there can be some kingmaking going on. So yeah, it could use some work on turn order balance and bluffing elements, but this isn't a serious Euro where those cons would carry more weight. Auction Web is grab and go interaction that holds together well when not excessively scrutinized by us crazy board gamers. With some more changes on the horizon, maybe we can just totally ignore the name and enjoy being simps with our buddies. My personal score for Auction Web is going to be a 6 out of 10. I have an above average time with it. I'm typically pretty favorable towards short card games and mix in that bluffing element that I love to mind game with, and Auction Web has always been a pretty consistent time. Playtime feels efficient, there's pretty good player interaction for me, and games tend to be fairly close near the end. So what's holding it back? Well, let's cut to the bookshelf. Let's look at all these heavier games. Brass Birmingham. Woo-hoo. Yeah, you see all those games? That means that I've been playing Auction Web with a bunch of seasoned board gamers. And when I play with them, the problems in gameplay that are not that big, they do end up bubbling to the surface. It's just kind of inevitable that this mindset comes up after playing all these games and having that reviewing mindset. And Auction Web just feels like it needs more to get in the regular rotation of games. There is also some funkiness going on with the passing mechanisms too. First, I find it really ugly how you have no advantage whatsoever going first, since you can't reinforce properties or get first dibs bonuses anywhere. Again, this could be solved by what I brought up in the cons. Then for a game with the pass action as well, I really do wish there was some way to truly stall your turn. Think of Eric Lane games like Blood Rage, where you have a ton of card abilities or zero cost actions to wait your opponents out. Here, perhaps you could spend VP to stall, but then that might help those who are ahead too much. I just haven't found a way to add mechanics while still keeping this game fairly simple to my liking. That's a tough one. There is also that element that scoring is all completely public. So while it's cool you won't know what's in your opponent's hands, final turns in the last round can sometimes play themselves, as people just bid on the space where the guy is winning. There's other lighter games I'd probably play over Auction Web, like Love Letter or Coup, but if someone wants me to play Auction Web with them, I'll play with them, and it's probably going to be a fun time. As always, thanks to our patrons for making videos like this possible. We got Manuel G, Brian C, Clifford H, Aaron W, Max B, Bora, Jeremy M, C, Charlie P, Quinton S, Sam S, Travis R, Alvin Y, Bombsy K, Ryan D, Jennifer L, Brett M, Matt G, Peter Z, Spear 71, Ryan J, Brad G, Tiamo period, Mark A, James N, Evan B, Charles B Jr., Josh J, Baspar, Rado, Sophie, Reiner Z, Colin Allen, Hudson T, and Pearson B, and Omar F. And we got two Mad Lads cardboard, we got ZL and Jeff L, and we got this guy, and then we also got Amy, our Mad Lady of Cardboard. Thank you guys so much. If you want to check out our Patreon, check out the link in the description below. So that's it for Auction Web. Let me know if there's any other light games that are similar to this, and remember to like and subscribe. See you guys later. Bye-bye. Bye.